If you want to make a creative impact, master the game, you can disrupt the game, or you can overpower the game. Number one thing you can do is master the game. Understand the rules and learn how you can be the best within. Michael Jackson is the blueprint of this. Now, he comes from a musical family, obviously with the Jackson 5, they had a ton of hits, but he's able to stand out for a number of reasons. Now, there were some solo attempts early on, but when he got to adulthood, he took the solo career a lot more serious. There are two smart ways that he was able to master the game at this point, really early on. The first thing he did was that he actually went with a label that was not the one he was currently with. The smart part about this was that sometimes when you go to a new venue or new area, you end up being higher value. To paraphrase a saying, a prophet is an idiot within his own home. In other words, you don't always have the respect that you deserve or that you've earned from the people who don't see you from afar. Then he started making moves behind the scenes to not only consolidate his power, but also give him more leverage within the game of the music industry. Up getting some of his masters back, if not all of them, buying the Beatles catalog. Most importantly, he ended up getting a piece of Sony, which was the head company of Epic, which he was signed to. So let's break that down. He was signed to a company and ended up becoming an owner of the company.
You were the guy who said to Michael Jackson, you should get into publishing.
Some advice, Paul? Yeah. I took him aside and said, diddle, and think about getting into music publishing. Oh, I'm going to get yours. Well, I went, oh, he slapped
sure
him
you
on
are.
the back. Good one, you know. And then I just got rung up and said, he's got yours.
You understand the rules of the game so that you can be the best within those rules. The next approach is to disrupt the game. Understand the rules well enough so that you can challenge the system. Now, Prince was a fellow prodigy. In fact, I think he learned about 30 or so instruments. The rumor is that in his first couple of albums, he actually played all the instruments but used overdubbing. He was also an artist coming up in the 70s. And if you were around in the 70s and you wanted a major commercial hit, or if you even wanted to get on the radio, you had to go through a major label. The independent outlets weren't happening as they are now with Apple Music and Spotify and all these different things. The internet wasn't even around yet. So he ended up signing a deal with Warner Brothers. The funny thing is that if he was around today, he probably would have produced things himself. But he was at a period of time where that didn't quite make sense for the directions he wanted to go in, financially or otherwise. Now, this seemed like a good decision at the time, but then he started to chafe under the corporation known as Warner Brothers. The first problem was that he was extremely prolific. If you're in a traditional system, there's only so much music or content you can put out. I understand that from the book publishing industry. And so there's going to be limitations as far as how quickly you can get things out, because there needs to be a marketing campaign. They need to make sure that the money's right. They need to do the research and development, audience testing, advertising, all those different things that big corporations do. The second part of it, which is even more concerning, is that they actually didn't allow him to have ownership of the things he created. In other words, he didn't own his masters, which is intellectual property. So if someone wanted to use his song in a commercial, or if someone wanted to do something else with his song, then he didn't have the permission or even have to be notified that those things were happening because he didn't own that. And then Purple Rain happened. When he started getting big with the album Controversy, and then had another breakthrough with 1999, but particularly when he hit with Purple Rain, having the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. I think he was the first person to do that. Then suddenly he realized the numbers weren't adding up. He didn't have as much control over his brand as he thought. So he did two really smart moves to get out of that situation and to prosper from it. The first move he did was that he made his feud or issue with Warner Brothers public. He said, listen, they're not allowing me to release this beautiful music that I created for y'all because they don't want me to put out so much music. They're not allowing me to own the things that I created for y'all that I did with my own little hands. And by making it public, then he got the public on his side as far as his audience, but he also was able to inform artists like myself as far as the issues with these contracts. That also put Warner Brothers on the spot because then the audience and the artists became more mad at them. But once he got out of the contract, that's where the real power play happened. Galvanized that audience. And suddenly, he had this system in place, this new system, through taking advantage of the internet, being one of the first artists to create their own website, having an email newsletter where you can connect to fans, even selling music directly from his website, CDs and everything, and making a lion's share of the profit.
Crystal Ball sold upwards of 200,000 copies at $50 a pop. 200,000 copies by industry standards would be a failure, but when you take the lion's share of the profit.
In other words, he ended up disrupting the system and then creating his own system. Understand the rules well enough so that you can challenge the established system. You can also overpower the game. Create enough buzz so that the system has to shift towards you. Jay-Z was a hustler over in Brooklyn for most of his young adulthood until he connected with the Notorious B.I.G. and other folks who were already having their stardom as rappers, as creators, as artists, getting off the street. And they told him, you know, you have a gift of gab. Maybe you should consider changing your lifestyle. So he connected with two other hustlers, Biggs Burke as well as Dame Dash, who both have their claim to fame nowadays too. They created something called Rockefeller, a little company. And they took their little company and they ended up talking to the different music labels in New York. And they said, hey, this rapper Jay-Z, he's phenomenal. We already have a system in place, let's go. And they all said, no, we're not gonna do that. They ended up making two really smart moves that would affect them for decades. The first thing that they did is that they pulled together their money. They ended up making their first single, self-produced it, called In My Lifetime, featuring Jay-Z. And then they ended up doing this extravagant, eye-popping video that looked like it was on the Cayman Islands or something. And based on the video and the quality of the song, because he actually could rap, it ended up becoming a success. And then suddenly those record labels that they had to kick in the door for, suddenly were trying to get with them. Second move was even more important. They already had leverage. Because of that leverage, they were able to do a partnership and or a distribution deal, which basically meant that the record label, in this case, Def Jam, would distribute the things, they would split the profits, but most importantly, Rockefeller would still own the intellectual property or the masters that were done during their partnership. So when their partnership ended in the early 2000s, they took those masters with them. And that helped make Jay-Z one of the first hip-hop billionaires within a few years after Rockefeller ended.
We're just gonna keep giving it away. We're gonna keep building Snapchat. We're gonna keep building Twitter. We're gonna keep building Instagram. Then go to them and say, hey man, give me a marketing deal. Like now, we built that. Yeah. And now we come back and we have to ask for things.
Make enough of a buzz and then the system will shift towards you. So which system is best for you? To master the game, to disrupt the game, trying to overpower the game? It really all depends on where you are, how long you want your journey to be, and the resources that are available. Now, they actually all have issues, potential pitfalls, as you might have figured out. Mastering the game is going to be a cap or limitation to the amount of influence you're going to have.
Michael Jackson wasn't even making dollars off of his. So, for example, if they were selling Michael Jackson record Thriller for $9.99, right? How much money do you really think he made off of each copy of Thriller? And that shit sold the most records ever. He made a lot of money. What you think the record labels made? They made all the money.
When it comes to disrupting the game, you want to make sure that you have a system in place you can actually go to. There's so many creators where they were within a system, they felt like they had the audience, and then they left the system and realized that the system was propping them up in a certain way. When it comes to overpowering the system, this can be dangerous because timing, quality of your product or service, just because of dumb luck, you might not build enough buzz so that you'll have an equal place at the table so that the system will shift towards you. I think they all have value. I mastered the game when it came to journalism. I've disrupted the system when it's come to my book publishing, overpowering the system, particularly with my startups, and the second one called Cuddler, which we bootstrapped and were able to sell about a year after we launched it. Whether you're trying to master the system, disrupt the system, overpower the system, if you don't have your own personal buzz, it's going to be difficult to do that and do anything, frankly, within the system. The best way to start the buzz is to work on what Seth Godin calls your minimal viable audience. That MVA are your hardcore fans, the folks that are really into your stuff, that will buy your merch, buy your music, come see you in concert, and come to the live streams that you do. These people that really rock with you. The more people that rock with you that are hardcore, and the more concentrated that energy is, the better success you'll have within the system. So either way, or no matter which way you look at the game, you're gonna have to build a community. So start building a community today. If you want to make a creative impact, you can either master the game disrupt the game or overpower the game. Number one thing you can do is master the game. Understand the rules so you can be dominant in it. Drake follows this blueprint. The Canadian was raised in the arts. His uncle is funk legend Larry Graham, and when he was young, he ended up getting an acting role in the cult classic TV show Degrassi High. Now he was able to take this acting buzz and get into music, particularly rap and his mixtapes, or his blend of rapping and singing. He did this in his hometown of Toronto until it got into the hands of Lil Wayne, the iconic rapper down in New Orleans who's part of the Cash Money crew, and he ended up signing Drake onto his own imprint called Young Money. There are two ways that Drake mastered the game. First, Drake strategically aligns himself with new talent. The mainstream music system is notoriously fickle. Usually, rappers in particular will have a couple years or maybe even a couple months in the spotlight, and then suddenly they're gone. Drake had his first major hits back in 2009, and in the time since, he's had dozens of number ones. But a lot of those come from collaborations, and whether it's Afro pop or reggae, he's able to get onto that next wave and listen to, absorb that particular style, as well as highlight and collaborate with the newcomers that are coming in that are using that style. Second, Drake made himself indispensable to the major labels. This is in two ways: branding and power. With hundreds of millions of singles and albums sold, Drake was able to negotiate a 9-figure deal for his next contract. Now you might ask, why does he go independent? But why would he do that if he can have the corporations pay for his outlay and for his overhead? Drake is a brand. And it is said he has serious power behind the scenes, having equity in a new artist management company that's pulling strings behind a lot of other major artists. In the 48 Laws of Power, one of the laws says that you should make yourself indispensable and not make people dependent on you. And Drake has this in spades. He's not going anywhere. The next approach is to disrupt the game. Understand the rules well enough so that you can challenge the system. Kendrick Lamar also started his path early, becoming a rapper back in his hometown of Compton. He linked with Top Dog Entertainment, or TDE, a local management group that was also on the come up, and started his own collective called Black Hippie. But out of all the rappers that were in that collective, he shined the most, particularly when he got his mixtape in the hands of another Compton icon.
J. Cole, did you tell Dr. Dre about Kendrick?
Kendrick Lamar disrupted the game, specifically hip-hop, in two distinct ways. First, he established credibility well beyond the rap circles and the b-boy critics. His honest, almost intellectual style made it easier for outsiders and people that didn't understand hip-hop to understand what was going on in his community and in his life. When he talked about his challenges in Compton, specifically in his first major album, Good Kid, Mad City, it was almost like he was a reporter. He was giving a first-person view for people that didn't understand. The clarity continued through his albums to the crescendo of actually getting a Pulitzer Prize for one of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't know, even as a writer myself, that rap albums could get Pulitzer Prizes, but I imagine a lot of us figured that out when it happened to Kendrick. Second, he created on his own time. A lot of critics today call modern day hip hop microwave culture, because you throw an artist in there, you give them a couple hit singles, and they get hot really quickly, and then before you know it, they're cold on the plate. In his first couple decades as an artist, Kendrick released albums every 4 to 5 years, which is unheard of in the hip hop community. No, actually, there are other artists that do that, but no one cares when they come out. Whenever he came out with the album, it was a movement, an event. The extra time cooking allowed him to stretch what modern day hip hop could be, from the social, political discussions of To Pimp a Butterfly to the more modern, therapy-based double album, Mr. Burrell and the Big Steppers. When it comes to Kendrick Lamar, people aren't talking about his deep level of emotional intelligence. That is required if you're going to dissect something or someone to the level that he has with his recent songs. The last album actually talked about his dark side, his shadow side. He was doing his shadow work. And that came to understanding the dark side of his family, the dark side of his marriage, even the dark side of himself. He had Eckhart Tolle come in and do the interludes for the album. That's about as deep as you can get. That's extremely deep for a public-facing artist. And that means no matter what happens to him next career-wise, he's already won. You can also overpower the game. Create enough of a buzz so that the system or the center shifts to you. J. Cole also had long-running rap aspirations when he was down in Fayetteville, North Carolina, all the way to a little bit later on in his teenage years when him and his best friend, who's now his manager, went up to New York and waited outside of Jay-Z's offices just to give him a mixtape. Now, they grinded it out and stayed there in the Big Apple for a couple years, and then they actually did get a deal with Jay-Z right after his post-Rockefeller label, Roc Nation, began. Jermaine overpowered the system in two smart ways. First, he made it clear that he was in rap for the love of the game. When his highly anticipated album, The Off-Season, arrived in 2021, he didn't go on a press tour. He wasn't even in the country. He was actually found playing pro basketball outside of the country overseas. Seriously. Shortly after, he would just randomly appear on the hottest rappers' albums, from Benny the Butcher to Lil Durk, and absolutely kill it in a guest verse. And then he'd disappear and go hang out with his wife and kids for months at a time. He's telling us, I love music, but the system doesn't run me. The second strategy was to get his power back as soon as possible. When you get a major label deal, you get the benefits of distribution, exposure to new audiences, of course, someone else footing the bill rather than you having to pay to create your art. The trade-off, though, is that music labels usually get your masters, your intellectual property. They actually didn't allow him to have ownership of the things he created. In other words, he didn't own his masters, which is intellectual property. So if someone wanted to use his song in a commercial, or if someone wanted to do something else with his song, then he didn't have the permission or even have to be notified that those things were happening because he didn't own it. Now, artists can sometimes negotiate to get their masters back, usually when a contract is being negotiated or a contract expires and they're being asked to re-up. But often the artists are offered a bigger advance, a big check against future recordings. It's essentially a loan. But J. Cole had hit after hit after hit and didn't ask for any money. And then his breakthrough Forest Hill Drive happened. He wanted to do things independently now, and he was going for all the marbles. Freedom is power, then J. Cole is the poster child. So which system is best for you? Mastering the game, disrupting the game, or overthrowing the game? It really depends on how many resources you have, how long you want your journey to be, what kind of experience you want to have in your industry. If you try to master the game, then you're beholden to the system. Drake has to work hard to always try to be on top. Otherwise, there'll be other people or other things that are going to keep things moving in a fickle industry. And while critics say that he should have went independent when his current contract ended, the fact is that the infrastructure, whether it's the marketing team or the people behind the scenes, the stage shows, all those things, even though he's a multimillionaire, would come straight out of his pocket. And frankly, the infrastructure might be too big for him to go independent. So if you're going to master the game, chances are you will be in the game for the rest of your career. If you try to disrupt the game, you better make sure that your art is shifting the culture. Kendrick has to push the envelope with every single release because the bar that he's actually setting himself keeps getting higher, and that's required if you're actually going to disrupt the system. And if you try to overthrow the game, you better make sure that your strategy is on point. J. Cole is required to show up at his very best every time he does show up because his showing up is so erratic and so much based on his own schedule. And the worst thing is that if you're away for a while and you show up and nobody cares. So what strategy will you use to claim your creative power? Is there a strategy you're using right now? Are there certain artists that you can pick out that are using this strategy as we speak? Drop a line in the comments or drop me a line or a DM. I'd love to hear your take on it. And let me know how I can support. Until next episode, remember you can always bring your worth, you can always build